So welcome, Janet and Liz. I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Fabulous to be here.
Janet, could you give a little brief introduction of yourself? And then Liz, you can go second.
Okay.
Of course. My name is Janet Rowley, and I am from originally the Bay Area in California, born in San Francisco. And my parents came in the late 50s to Salt Lake City. My mother, a very good Lutheran girl from Minnesota. My father, a very much less active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He had been ordained a deacon and not attended church since he was 12 years old, very much coming from a less active family. They came to Salt Lake from California. My mother was introduced to the gospel. She became quickly enamored with the gospel. And then I was, of course, introduced to the gospel. I attended Brigham Young University, where I received a bachelor's degree in English, later taught high school locally for a few years as I raised my children. Most of those years were part-time teaching high school, and had 5 sons and 1 daughter. And Liz, whom you will hear from, is my only daughter, and she is extraordinary, and so she is really as wonderful as 5 daughters. So that makes me very happy. 3 of my 5 sons, 3 of Liz's brothers are married, and so she has 3 really fabulous sisters now. My daughter-in-laws are precious. My husband and I currently are serving in a mid-singles ward. My husband is the bishop of a population of young people, young single adults between the ages of 31 and 45, and that's been a rich experience thus far. And we've also had a really unique opportunity for the past 20 plus years of guiding church history tours for a company called Mormon Heritage Association. And we have traveled to some sacred, extraordinary places and met wonderful people along the way who now feel like family. And that's enough about me.
I am Liz Jorgensen, the fortunate daughter of Janet and Bill Rowley. I am married to Logan. Logan and I met when we were about 12 years old. We were raised in the same stake, but we became friends in junior high and began dating in high school, our senior year in high school. After high school, Logan left to serve his mission in Germany and Austria. And in the meantime, we wrote, and I was going to school at Westminster and here in Salt Lake City and received my degree in elementary education. Logan came home about 10 years ago, and we were married in the summer of 2011. We have 4 children. We have an 18-month-old little boy, Gabe. We have a 3-year-old daughter, Victoria, a 5-year-old son, Austin, and our oldest, Eli, was born in January of 2013. He would be 8, but keeps watch over us from heaven.
When I first met Liz, she was still in the Young Women's program. I knew Janet through Relief Society activities and things like that, and was always very impressed with her. And especially as we started to learn about church history stuff, I just mentioned that I think it would be awesome to have my own personal Rowley lessons for the Doctrine and Covenants this year. It would be
so
fantastic. I was always really impressed with Liz, and I heard about Eli's story because I was pregnant. My son was born almost exactly a month before Eli was born. And so when I heard about what was going on with Eli, I started to follow the story a bit more and was so amazed with Liz and her strength as she was dealing with these complications that her young son was having. And at the time, Liz, you were not very old as far as moms go, right? How old were you?
We were 23. So young now that I look back. I can't believe it.
And I think that added a bit to the heartbreak of it, is having you guys be so young and facing such real hard and adult problems. Can you share a little bit more about Eli and his very brief but very impactful life?
Yeah, of course. Eli was born, as I mentioned, in January of 2013. Logan and I wanted to start a family right away. I had wanted that for as long as I could remember, and Logan did as well. Eli took a little bit longer to get here than we anticipated. So we were so happy and felt so blessed when he was born. For about 6 weeks, the first month and a half, everything was pretty much as you would expect with a newborn baby. We were exhausted, but he was healthy and seemed perfect. But then one day he developed a rash that brought me concern. And I called the pediatrician's office, and they kind of brushed it off as, a paranoid first time mom, and told me to call back in a few days if it wasn't better. But the next day it was worse, and I knew something was wrong. So I called them again and asked if we could be seen. They had us come in, and fortunately we had a proactive doctor who had us get some blood drawn for him. And he told us that he would call us if he noticed anything wrong. Otherwise, we could just go home and we would talk the next day, because it was toward the end of the workday. And as we were unlocking the front door, coming back home from that blood draw, my phone rang. And before I even looked at it, I knew it would be the doctor, and I knew it wasn't good news. He proceeded to tell us that we needed to take Eli to the Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City because there were some major red flags with his blood work. Logan gave him a blessing. I don't remember what he said, but I do remember it brought me comfort. And then we immediately headed up. And for the next several days, they tested for virus after virus and had us talk to so many different teams of doctors up there, and they could not figure out what this rash was. But after 4 days of running tests, they diagnosed him with something called severe combined immune deficiency, which is commonly referred to as the bubble boy disease. It basically just means that he had been born without a functioning immune system. So it was scary. We didn't know anything about it, but when they told us that his treatment would require chemotherapy and a bone marrow transplant, I think that's when it hit us that it was serious. They told us that it would be about 4 to 5 months in the hospital, but that he had a great prognosis, that they expected that he'd have a 90% chance of being successfully treated. So we hung on that. And I'm glad they gave us that hope, because it really got us through the next 3.5 months in the hospital. We moved into the hospital with Eli, and I was able to sleep there. Only one parent's allowed to sleep there, so Logan slept at home, but during the day we were both there. We kind of put our life on hold for him, and he received his treatment, he received his chemotherapy, and he received his bone marrow transplant, which both went very well. But unfortunately, I had passed a virus to Eli through my breast milk when I was nursing him. That is very difficult for a baby without an immune system to handle. And while his new immune system was trying to establish itself inside his body, that virus kind of tore through him and really was too much for his little body to overcome. When he was about 4.5 months old, after 3.5 months in the hospital, he unfortunately passed away.
And at that time, you guys, since he was having the bone marrow he was so immunocompromised, you guys really had to isolate yourselves as well. So you couldn't physically be near mom to help you and support you. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. The doctors kind of left it up to us. They realized that each family has different needs and needs to make their own decisions. We wanted to do everything in our power to give him the best chance to get healthy. Both of our families so wonderfully supportive, were very understanding when we asked that they refrain from visiting the hospital. Occasionally, we would meet them for lunch outside of the hospital, but for the most part, we talked to them on the phone multiple times a day. But we definitely isolated ourselves and kind of became family with the nurses and everybody else up at the hospital.
So, Janet, as a mom, what was that like for you to watch your daughter, mostly from afar, go through something so emotionally tragic and difficult?
Oh, I felt like it was almost doubly hard. When the pain is your own, you dig deep and rely upon that magnificent knowledge we have of the plan of salvation, just as Liz did, and you buoy yourself up. However, when it's your child, we are so accustomed as mothers to sheltering our children from pain. to absorbing pain, to saying, you take a step back and let me bear your burden. And I could do none of that. Of course, I was praying constantly for Liz and Logan, and we talked multiple times a day. And I think what really sustained me was the few weeks I had, because Liz just lived around the corner. And I think I was at her home almost every day when Eli was healthy and we thought that all was well. And so I had quite a bit of time to love on that baby and bond with him. And that gave me comfort. But it was difficult because all of that support had to come from afar in ways that weren't intuitive to me when I wanted to wrap my arms around her. And she, in turn, just supported and sustained me because she was so, without exception, strong. I truly don't believe, Liz, that I saw a break in your demeanor, in your positive, hopeful attitude, faithful attitude throughout the entire process. It was quite extraordinary.
To watch that strength and that growth that you've seen your daughter in that blessed month of Eli being healthy, and getting to watch that change in your daughter as she steps into motherhood, but then to watch her not only cope with something so tragic, but cope with it with faith and to move forward with strength and to, like you said, uplift others, whether it was you or whether it was other people through different blog posts and things like that that she shared to help her
yes.
story, and her faith was just amazing.
It really was extraordinary. And of course, she'll probably talk more about this. She alluded to the fact that Eli didn't come quite as quickly as they had hoped. He came following a miscarriage, following a surgery to remove endometriosis that was causing infertility. And then they would learn, of course, that Eli's condition was genetic. And that future children would be impacted. And so that was grief I also felt, as it wasn't just this is one great tragedy, and losing a child is always a heartbreaking tragedy. But it projected into the future and her future. And that was something that I was trying to deal with, as I know she was.
Yeah, Liz, can you talk about that, the future pregnancies that you had, and how I feel like you guys, both of you, have dealt with the idea of moving one step forward and two steps back. You get a little bit of good news and then things move backwards for you. Can you talk a little bit about how that came into play with future pregnancies?
Yeah. Before he died, we were told that it was likely that we were carriers of this condition. Sometimes it's random, but for the most part, the parents are carriers, and we were told to expect that. And after he passed away, they confirmed through genetic testing on me and Logan that we had a 25% chance of passing this condition on to future children. So we had to make the decision how we wanted to grow our family from that. We had the option of continuing to have children naturally and hope for the best. And if we had another skid baby, we would treat him or her. There's also, of course, adoption. But Logan and I made the decision to pursue IVF with genetic testing. We didn't know anything about it, but a doctor that had treated Eli mentioned it to us as a possibility because he knew how much we had hoped to have more children. Fortunately, things fell into place with us for that. We had wonderful doctors taking care of us, and we were able to go that route. But when I was pregnant with our second son, I developed a blood disorder completely unrelated to the skid that Eli had. And it kind of changed my pregnancies forever. And it made my next two children very sick. And so once again, when Logan and I thought we were past our most difficult challenge, which Eli's death was proved to be the most difficult, but when we thought this IVF was kind of our way, out of all of that, here we are thrown into brand new challenges and brand new heartache. We didn't know for sure if I could safely carry babies. I was pregnant with our son, Austin. We didn't know if he would survive or if I would be able to to carry the embryos that we had frozen, that we had worked so hard to get. And when I think of how we found the strength to get through those times, I am reminded of the story in the Old Testament of the young man who was serving the prophet Elisha. And when he wakes up one morning, of course, we know the story. He sees a great army surrounding the city, and he runs to Elisha and asks what they're going to do. And Elisha's response is, "Fear not, for they that be with us are more than they that be with them." And I think Logan and I started to realize that we weren't fighting those battles alone. Just as the Lord opened that young man's eyes to see the great multitude surrounding them, Logan and I realized that we had, on both sides of the veil, so many people supporting us, from our families and friends and strangers to angels. Of course, Eli now. We thought of it was so comforting to think of him and know that he was right there, and many other angels. So I think that gave us so much strength, knowing that we had new challenges ahead to grow our family, that we had a great multitude fighting with us.
And then a while after that, Janet, you were diagnosed with cancer. And in your situation, you also seem to have where you'd take one step forward and two steps back, and just these different complications would come into play. Can you talk a little bit about that experience for you and how that helped to strengthen both of your families? And also,
Of course.
could you talk about the strength of prayer? I know that both of you have reached out to others to ask for prayers during times of difficulty. And how has that helped you?
Absolutely. Yes, it was 3 years. Was it 4 years, wasn't it, Liz, after Eli's passing?
Yep, about
Four and a half, that I went for a routine mammogram. And here's a plug for routine mammograms, because I had had one the previous year, and I had a callback, which nobody wants a callback, but often that's uneventful. However, after my second mammogram, the nurse, or the technician rather, told me that a radiologist would like to come and talk to me. And I thought, not a good sign. And he met with my husband and I. My husband had fortunately come with me that day. And he told me that I had a little spot. He said, however, I am almost 100% sure this is a malignancy. It's early. It shouldn't be problematic. I would assume you could have a lumpectomy, and with the removal, perhaps some radiation, and walk away from this without much difficulty. That gave us great hope. And so my little lump was biopsied, and indeed it was malignant. However, and this was the first complication, what could have been quite a simple fix, because it was caught so early and it was a small tumor, proved to be a more aggressive cancer. It was HER2 positive. It required that I receive chemotherapy. And so I prepared myself to receive chemotherapy in addition to a targeted therapy. I proceeded to have a port implanted just above my heart. And after my first 2 chemotherapy infusions, I developed a blood clot at the site of that port, which my physician had to step back, and they reviewed, determined to keep the port in place. And I was on injectable blood thinners for 6 months, and then oral blood thinners for another 6 months. After my 3rd chemotherapy, I was experiencing all of the side effects that accompany chemotherapy: great fatigue, nausea, vomiting, and of course, one of the most fun, hair loss. And of course, it's not just the hair on your head, it's the hair everywhere on your body. So you look like a skinned rabbit. And Liz had come with me on a Saturday, because I had determined to preempt all of this hair that was starting to fall out. And I had my head shaved by a little gal who was at that time cutting both of our hair. And so I came home with a little bald head, well, kind of a big bald head, really. It wasn't that little, and was really quite sick as I traveled to and from that hair appointment. And I thought, oh, I shouldn't be this anxious. This is just hair. Well, the evening proceeded, and I continued to feel worse and worse. My husband even gave me a blessing that night to still the nausea. And the next day, I felt progressively worse. All of the medication that the doctors had given me to try and preempt the nausea was having no effect. And I just kept telling my husband, who was very worried about me, just let me sleep. Just let me try and rest, because these are all symptoms of chemotherapy. Well, I have a good husband who was very inspired. And he was talking back and forth with Liz, as I recall, and then they were communicating with Huntsman Cancer Institute. And the oncologist on call, when my husband was explaining some of my symptoms, as he looked at my chart and recognized that I had a blood clot, said, you'd better take her to the ER. Let's rule out any kind of stroke.
Yeah.
By the time I reached the hospital, I have no memories. Everything I'm going to tell you now is from a third person, either Liz or Bill or the doctor. Apparently, I began having focal seizures. I received a lumbar puncture and an MRI, and I have no memory of any of that. And a very inspired and intuitive doctor said, I am concerned that your wife may have encephalitis. If she does, we will have those results, but not soon enough to intervene, and it can be fatal. I'm going to begin an antiviral medication through her port. It won't hurt her if she doesn't have encephalitis, but it may well save her life if she does. He was right. I did have encephalitis. And the prognosis for those with encephalitis is quite grim. 70% lose their lives to that disease, and the 30 who survive, only about 3% survive without any long-term physical or mental damage. And I am one of the lucky 3% who now can say that I have survived encephalitis without long-term damage, but it was a long way back. But another humbling experience. And I must say, Anne, this was one of my great gifts. One of the first memories I have was lying in a hospital room, and this was following a priesthood blessing, of course. My husband anointed. My wonderful second son sealed that anointing and promised me that I would live and recover. I have no memory of that, but I do remember the pain lifting and feeling that I had left my body and was observing what was taking place. And I was so happy to be free of pain, free of stress. And I remember thinking, and I'm free of cancer. It's all right. Let me stay here. And suddenly I was surrounded by love and peace in the most glorious environment. And what I remember most vividly was a handsome young man standing over me and telling me to lie down and giving instruction as to how I could be ministered to, and calming me and touching me tenderly and saying, you're going to be fine, but you need to go back. And then I heard someone say, oh, Eli, you know exactly what she needs. And I realized that it was my baby boy, now a beautiful young man who had in himself endured chemotherapy, a bone marrow transplant, and all of the ravages to his tiny body, and was ministering to me in the way only he could. And so my cancer has become one of my great gifts. because I've learned so many life lessons I could have learned in no other way.
I love that so much. As you started to talk about being surrounded by light, I was like, she's going to say Eli's there, and I'm going to cry.
Oh, and he so was there.
So both of you have talked about the importance of angels and how Eli seemed to jump into that role. How soon after his passing did you start to feel that maybe there was purpose in that, in him being able to come here in order to move on and in order to be an angel to your family, and especially, like Janet just said, in a situation where he can relate so well to her story and her trials and her suffering that he is able to personally minister to her?
I mean, for me, it almost felt immediate. It was hard for me to imagine. I felt such peace and comfort almost immediately after his passing. It was hard for me to imagine that I could feel so peaceful if there wasn't a great purpose in his life and the way it ended so early. And so I knew that the peace I felt, much of it was coming from him. I knew that he was helping direct our next steps, and I knew that many things that we had experienced, we wouldn't have experienced had he not gotten sick and passed away. As terrible as that experience was, I wouldn't want to change it. And I know Logan feels the same way. We met so many wonderful people as a result of his life and what he went through, from the medical staff, of course. I have friends that are in my life now because of that experience, and I'm seeing it now in a special way with our kids. We have a 1, 3, and 5-year-old, as I mentioned, who never had an opportunity to live with Eli, but the way they talk, it's hard to imagine that. They talk about him as if they were best friends, and I remind myself that they probably are. I see it in little conversations. We took the kids sledding a couple weeks ago, and as we were driving home, we drove past the cemetery where Eli is buried, and my 5-year-old looked over and said, "Oh, hi, Eli. Did you have fun sledding with us? Now time to go home." And my husband and I laughed, but then we were talking later and we said, he probably was with us. And whether or not our 5-year-old actually saw him or just knows in his heart that he was there, it's just another reminder to us that he's there for the big things, the challenging things that we go through, but also the small events. And I love remembering that.
Yeah. Janet, did you have anything to add?
Oh, I love Liz and Logan's focus on Eli. We celebrate as a family Eli's birthday in January, and we celebrate his Angel Day in May, the day he left us to begin this great mission. And Austin was the star of the week in his kindergarten class, and of course, his poster included a picture of Eli, because Eli is every bit an active member of their family. I had a little brother who passed when I was 5 years old as an infant, and we never spoke of it. It was a subject that wasn't broached. We never visited the cemetery. My parents were magnificent, but I think it was part of the time and perhaps the culture. And I'm so grateful that Liz and Logan talk openly and with great joy about Eli's brief life and about his continued life. I think it makes all the difference.
Thank you. There's a talk by Elder Richard G. Scott called Trust in the Lord, and in it he says, "Your Father in heaven and his beloved Son love you perfectly. They would not require you to experience a moment more of difficulty than is absolutely needed for your personal benefit or for that of those you love." Janet, do you want to share how you feel that to be true?
I just love that quote. As Liz is really my hero, my heroine, but she has so manifest her faith and the verity of Elder Scott's witness, because, as she mentioned, not only did she deal with initial miscarriage, loss, infertility, and then the bright light of Eli's birth, and then the heartbreak of his diagnosis, his death, and then the future diagnoses, and then the blood disorder that really did require her to have such extraordinary faith. Because, Liz, how many intrauterine transfusions did you have between Austin and Victoria?
7.
7, where they have to go straight in to her uterus and find that artery in the umbilical cord and transfuse blood. And both little Victoria and Austin were very premature, anemic, and fought for their lives. And Liz and Logan remained so true and faithful and emerged from all 3 of those experiences with extraordinary growth and capacity. And because with each challenge, Anne, as a mother, my heart would break a little more. And I remember falling to my knees. I don't think I ever said, "Why me?" But I think at one point, Liz, and it was when I was in London conducting a church history tour, Liz had called me. She had taken Austin to the hospital, Austin, her second child, who was doing really quite miraculously well after some extraordinary challenges. He went for a blood draw, and then, Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the site of his blood draw wouldn't stop bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
And they realized that his blood was not coagulating, and they were concerned he could even run the risk of having a stroke. Liz called me in London. We had just arrived, and here I was with an ocean separating us, with my sweet daughter in tears, saying, "Please pray for our Austin. He's been hospitalized. They're concerned that his blood is not coagulating and he could stroke." And I thought, oh no, not again. And I remember falling to my knees and not saying, "Why me?" but "Why Liz?" And then saying to Bill, "I need a priesthood blessing now." And he said, "Jan, I'm happy to give you that blessing." And we were both in tears. And he said, "And if you need to get on a plane and go home, we'll make that happen. But before I give you a blessing, will you offer a prayer?" That's the habit in our home. Whenever my husband offers a priesthood blessing, he asks someone to invite the Spirit to be there. And as I knelt by that strange hotel bed and said almost all I could say because I was crying, and I said, "Oh, Heavenly Father." And then suddenly I was awash in love. And again I felt Eli come into that room as the Holy Ghost encircled us in love. And I knew without a doubt at that moment, without saying anything else, that Austin would be fine. And so then I offered a prayer of thanks. Thanks for my faithful daughter and her magnificent husband. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for our magnificent angel Eli and for their beautiful little baby Austin, who would be blessed and healed. Closed the prayer and turned to my husband and said, "I don't need a blessing." And indeed, our little Austin is the picture of health and recovered very quickly.
And from what I know, he has plenty of energy.
Oh, yeah. Typical 5-year-old. He's great.
He's awesome.
I think one of the overarching themes in this is the idea of making sure that your faith is in the Savior. Your faith isn't in the outcome,
Right.
but in the Savior.
Yeah.
So the last question is always about pebbles of light that have come into your life. I know that I feel like we've talked about a few of them as well, but if you could share, Liz, you can go first, 1 or 2 people that have provided a pebble of light to help light your path and help you know the direction that you should go.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought about this as you had mentioned we might discuss it, and there are so many people that light my path, and I think that's what this life is all about, is trying to be that for other people and letting other people help you and light your life. There's so many I could have chosen from. There is a group of 4 other women that stood out to me the most. They are in my life as a result of Eli's life and what he went through. After he passed away, there was a group of 4 women in my ward who were about 10 years older than me, but kind of at the same point in life as me, because they had all been struggling with infertility. A couple of them had 1 child, maybe 2, and a couple of them didn't have any. And I knew who they were, but had never really spoken to them. Maybe a month or so after Eli died, one of them reached out to me and said, "We would like you to come hang out with us on Monday night with our husbands. We're going to eat dinner." At that moment, a very strong friendship was formed. And the reason it was so important and for my life, especially at that time, is because little did they know Logan and I would have to begin the IVF journey ourselves. And 3 of those 4 women were right in the thick of it. One of them was doing genetic testing, just like I needed to do. And one of them also was pursuing IVF with surrogacy, which Logan and I ended up having to pursue as well. We didn't know at the time, but we did later on. Those women, I couldn't have made it through the next 6-7 years of growing our family without them. They blessed my life with the gospel. They blessed me with incredible knowledge. They lit up my path more than they will ever know, and we are still great friends today, and I am so grateful for them.
And might I add, not only are they extraordinary women, but isn't our God an extraordinary architect? That divine design that Liz just happened to be in a ward that contained these women who would become such mentors to her, as well as a ward that circled the wagons and took care of this little family in amazing ways. He is such a wonderful architect of our lives.
There's that quote by Elder Maxwell about the stars in the sky, where the God who placed the stars also is in charge of placing us in each other's lives.
Yes, and I love it. Such a wonderful quote.
Okay, Janet, your turn with your Pebbles of Light.
Mine really does follow on the heels of Liz. Another heroine in my life is a beautiful young woman who happens to be Logan's sister. When Liz had completed this IVF process, she had just 3 embryos that were healthy. And they froze those embryos. And I remember Liz saying to me, "This is my family." And I thought, "Oh, my darling, you'll be lucky to have one of those babies survive and live." And then after her blood disorder, not only did Austin survive, that little embryo that was frozen, then we got out of the freezer little frozen Victoria, and she survived despite all of the challenges of Liz's blood disorder. And then her doctor, Liz's doctor, came to her and said, "Liz, you have another embryo, but your body would never be able to sustain another pregnancy because that blood disorder becomes more virulent with each subsequent pregnancy." And Liz's beautiful sister-in-law, Logan's sister, April, and her husband came to Liz and Logan and said, "We're not sure how you'd feel about this, but we would very much like to be the home for your final embryo." And April said, "I would like to carry that last little embryo." And Liz can fill in the details, but of course, with extraordinary gratitude and overwhelming love, they said yes. And April took on that challenge of pregnancy for her sister-in-law and carried that beautiful baby Gabriel Matthew, named after April's husband. And she, I think, manifested such unconditional Christ-like love. Indeed, when baby Gabe was sealed to his parents, because he was not born in the covenant, he was sealed, and President Craig Burton, the president of the Jordan River Temple, who officiated in that ordinance, looked at April and said, "I think this is the most Christ-like act I've ever witnessed, is what you gave to your brother and your sister-in-law." And I agree.
I can imagine that they felt inspired and directed to come to you, Liz, for that. How did that conversation happen?
As my mom mentioned, God is such a marvelous architect. It's crazy how it all played out, honestly. We knew that I wouldn't be able to carry that last baby, so we anticipated saving for as long as it took to hopefully one day have the money to hire somebody to be our surrogate. So we wanted to begin the process, and I made an appointment with an attorney who specialized in surrogacy and adoption. And we wanted to just get an idea of how much it would cost and where to even start, how to go about it. And about a week before our appointment with that attorney, Logan came home crying. And I was like, "Oh no, what's wrong?" And he said, "I was with April, and she said that she didn't know how to bring it up, but she's known for a very long time that she would like to carry our last embryo for us." And it was a huge answer to prayer. Not that we had ever specifically prayed for that, but we had prayed for some way to get this baby to our family. We knew he was to be part of our family. I can't even describe the feeling of hearing that. It's such a sacrifice. It's not surprising coming from April. If you know her, she did it completely out of love and had no desire to have any kind of attention. Anytime we wanted to offer her a shower or even write a thank you on Facebook, she didn't want any of it. She did it because she felt guided and directed. And it was purely out of love. And it was a huge, huge answer to our prayers.
That's such an amazing story, how this has all kind of come full circle to help get all of those here, all of those wonderful kids. And you had written in a blog post years ago now, you'd said, "We will get to hold him in our arms again," speaking of Eli, "but for now, I know he's often holding us." And I think that is such a wonderful thought to think about. He's made it. You know what I mean? He's made it home. And now we just have to get there to be with him. And we know that having him there, he's going to do everything he can to help us do the same.
Yep. And
So
I know that so many of these things that have happened to help get our kids here safely couldn't have happened the way they did without Eli on the other side. I know that for certain. He knew us best, and I know that was one of the many reasons he needed to move on to the other side, was to help get our family here.
And even the idea of living before we came to Earth as well. Like we were talking about your kids who are now here probably knew Eli.
Mm-hmm.
And just the idea of that support and help that we can get from our children before they're here.
Mm-hmm.
And the strength that they can provide for us. And
yeah,
absolutely. Thank you both so much for being here and sharing stories that are so close to your heart. I'm so grateful to be able to share these with more people so that they can hear about just the importance of eternal families and finding hope in the gospel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's been such a joy.